And Stevie went up in the plane, and then Stevie went down in the plane. Oh, hello. Thanks for joining me here at the Guitar Colonel Log Cabin. I'm just here with my senior sales executive, Panda, and I'm reading her some bedtime stories about all things rock and roll. Speaking of rock and roll, we are reminiscing about some famous rockers that have popped into our shop and had a chat with us here on the couch. And one of those is Australian rock guitar legend, Mr. Brett Kingman, of James Reyne fame and gear demonstration fame. Is he not the nicest young gentleman we've had? Let's revisit our interview with Brett, who was here, I think it was last year, I can't even remember. When was Brett here? What was he talking about? Skateboards and things and the beach? I have Brett Kingman with me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi Brett, thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure.
Brett, I have questions for you a lot, but before I delve back into your history of guitar, you're associated with Axe FX by Fractal.
Fractal Audio, yes.
How do you think in the future, and even now, how do you think that affects the sale of valve amps, touring, whether people will still use valve amps, or will everyone eventually go back to a Fractal Helix Line 6 system?
Well, earlier on in your question you asked how it affects the sale of valve amps. An Axe FX has a selection of about, in the current firmware, about 250, 260 classic and boutique valve amps and around 2,000 odd cabinets that you can mix and match. A lot of those valve amps are inaccessible to many guitar players. You would never get to try one in your lifetime. Let's say, in Australia at least, a Carol Ann Tucana amp.
Right, yeah.
Bit of a rare bird here. The Axe FX is accurate enough for you to get a very good sonic idea of what it can produce in a studio, because that's what the Axe FX is basically. It's a recorded version of any given amplifier, and that's what you hear. And that basically defines the difference between a tube amp, which you'll feel sound pressure level from, and all of those tangible elements that you can touch and all that sort of stuff. But behind the control room desk in the recording studio, the resultant effect is pretty much the same as what you get from an Axe FX as miking up the actual amp. I digress. You wouldn't be able to try a lot of those amps in the real world because they're just not available in the music stores, and music stores are a dying breed too, unfortunately.
Yes.
Although there's a couple of fabulous ones in Melbourne, we're very fortunate, and you being one of them. But in a lot of cases, let's use the Carol Ann Tucana as an example. You can try it and you might think, wow, this is really, really cool. What a great sounding amp. It's different than a Fender, or it's different than a Marshall or a Vox. I'd like to get the real thing. So it kind of acts as an electronic advertisement by having that model, and apparently people will then go and buy the real thing because they suddenly covet the real Carol Ann amp, and because they've been able to experience what it can deliver via the Axe FX or the Kemper or any of the other great modelers, that's having a positive effect for a lot of those smaller boutique builders who don't have the bricks and mortar access around the world.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. Does it do a Dumble clone?
Every major Dumble is represented in the Axe FX, and Cliff Chase, the guy who's behind Fractal Audio Systems, owns one or two of those Dumbles, and probably 100 other fabulous amps that he models himself and makes sure that they're deadly accurate in the firmware of the Axe FX. So you can dial up an overdrive special and any number of cabinets to go with it. And having used a Dumble before myself in the late 80s, I can tell you that it's pretty bloody close.
Was that here or overseas?
No, in 1988 we had the good fortune to have a fella called James Ralston from Tina Turner's band on board with James Reyne. We were touring with Tina Turner and we shared the same management. Hello, Roger. And Tina was off the road, so we poached James Ralston, her guitar player, and who's a Californian fella, and keyboard player by the name of Ollie Marland. And James had an overdrive special combo that he used to bring backstage and warm up with. and both of us thought it just sounded like a very creamy Bassman, which really is what they are.
Yeah.
And it was never used on stage at all. He used to use boogies and I ran Marshalls, but we had it on that tour for a good 3 or 4 months.
Oh, right. Amazing. Yeah, how much are those amps?
Well, now I think Joe Bonamassa and those sorts of people and the collectors have shot them up to 6 figures.
Yes. Wow.
Back then it was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 grand, I suppose.
Oh, okay, right. So they were really expensive back then as well.
Oh yeah, they were always dear. They were always dearer than stock standard production model Fenders and boogies and stuff, because you had to wait for such a long time, and there was one hefty guy building them.
Right.
And so the waiting list,
right.
the waiting list was long. I'm not sure whether Howard Dumble's even still alive. I guess he is.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I'm
either.
sure we would have read about it had he passed on. But
if you're watching, Howard, just write something in the comments.
Just leave us
know.
a comment, would you please, just to make sure you're okay, because
you never know.
Great stuff. So yes, I'm fortunate. I've played a Dumble, and they're all there in the XFX, to answer your question. And same with things like Ken Fisher's Trainwrecks.
Yep.
Another very rare bird, fabulous, super hot rodded, very dynamic amp. There's a couple of those in the XFX firmware as well.
Yep.
Every major Fender amp that's ever been built, every major Marshall amp that's ever been built, all of the boogies, all of the new John Petrucci series boogies. It doesn't want for much at all. If you can't find a tone in there, you're really up against it.
Why did you choose that system versus something like Line 6 Helix?
Because it was renowned for being the best, and I've always been a bit of a technology nerd, and I've always wanted to exploit what technology was able to offer in the guitar world. I remember beginning with the little Zoom racks, and then the Digitech 2101, which was quite a complicated unit then and still is now. They're a bugger to get your head around in the firmware wise.
Did you ever
most
have
of them
one
broke
of the,
down. Pardon?
Did you ever have one of the old Robert Fripp, what was that system he used? And Pat Metheny, I think, had one.
No.
A Roland.
Never had the synth, but we did use the VG 88 for a couple of mid-period James Reyne albums, and it was really, really good. Hughes and Kettner had the Zentera, but before all of that, you'll remember the Rockman.
Yeah.
Tom Schultz, the guitar player from Boston, invented an entire industry around the Rockman, which was like a big belt pack thing, and I've got a mint one at home because I recorded with it a lot. Def Leppard, ZZ Top did entire albums with it.
Oh wow, there you go. I did not know that.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
So it was right up the front of the modelling world as well. So they've kind of always been there since, I guess, the late 70s.
Did you when Fractal came out with the XFX, did you jump on board straight away?
No, I didn't. I didn't get on board until the XFX 2, and I had to wait a year and a half for it. But when I did get it, it was somewhat of a revelation because it allowed me so much sonic scope, and so I really dug into it and started immediately writing presets and things for it, and ended up being kind of a family member of the Fractal fraternity now, I suppose you could say. So I like to write patches and things that and just share them around for free for people to use, because the community's been so good to me. I'm happy to give back. Well,
I just watched your latest video, the Brown Sound video. Pretty impressive Van Halen licks too, sir. Incredible.
Well, yeah, I was a not so closet Van Halen head in the I remember hearing Fair Warning for the first time in 1981 while I was underneath the big columns in St. Peter's Square in Rome, and I just thought, oh my lord.
Yeah, incredible.
And so that turned my hair around, because I was previously listening to Zappa and Ted Nugent and all of the other late 70s kind of rock and roll heroes.
Oh yeah, I love Zappa.
So I latched onto that fairly early, and I remember practicing Eruption with Brett Garsed, a young Brett Garsed, when I was working at Brash's. He used to come in quite a lot. G'day, Brett. And that kind of cemented our friendship as well, and we're still great mates.
Oh, cool.
To this day, yeah.
Is he's out Castlemaine way or something?
Yeah, I believe he's living somewhere in central Victoria, living the country life.
Great player as well.
Country esquire these days. An insane player.
Yeah, there's some incredible players in Australia. So when you're touring, and at the moment you're touring with James Reyne.
Yep.
We'll talk about that in a sec. Do you take 2 units with you in case one breaks down, or?
I don't. I cannot afford 2 units at this point in time, but I've never it's never failed me in 6 years of use, except for one occasion in Tasmania when there wasn't enough power. And if you don't give enough power to it, any digital unit, be it a keyboard or something like the Axifex, they just stop or freak out, which is what happened. And
what sort of it's just, what does it run off?
240
mains.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they just, so it must have been everything plugged
I
into
believe that all the lighting rig was taking up too much of voltage or current or whatever the technical term is. I'm not sure, but it we had a drama that night. But I backed it up with a little Tech 21 fly rig,
yes.
which is an analog device, which is kind of a baby version of a modeler and an extension of their own Sans amp. Hello, Dale in New York, and Andrew, and it was fine. So
easy fix.
Yep,
that's cool. Now, how did you get the James Reyne gig and all these? I think you played with Ross Wilson and many people, and you've been playing a long time.
A long time, since 1972.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you were
not as a professional. I was only 9 in 1972, but as you can tell, I'm getting on now.
So when you were young, like, did you get lessons or?
Yep. When I was young, the guitar was pretty much all I wanted to do from the ages of maybe 7 or 8 upwards, and I still remember being not much older than 1.5 or 2 years old and strumming a ukulele or a guitar on my uncle's knee, and my mother remembers that too. So I don't think I'm making it up, but I remember walking into a friend's older brother's bedroom, and Slade Alive was blaring in his bedroom. Noddy Holder was just yelling at the top of his voice and belting the crap out of his old SG or whatever they used on that Slade Alive album. And I thought it was like an epiphany, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do at the age of 8 or 9 in 71 or 1970 when it came out, and I just decided that was it. So
that's funny. I think Noel Gallagher likes that record as well.
Oh, it's a killer. One of the all-time great live albums. It's just so full of life and vibrancy and tough, balls to the wall rock and roll. It's an absolute ripper, and I still listen to it to this day. So that was what set me on my Exocet focus path. And I had lessons with a classically trained teacher in Dandenong, where I grew up at that point in time, for maybe 2 years, but she unfortunately passed away. But during that 2 years, I was so into it, I managed to jump several grades, and then I found out that I could play by ear, and I used to just sit in front of the television and play along with anything that came on the telly, soundtracks or commercials. Same with the radio, so I wasn't kind of fussed about styles or any of that sort of thing, although I had a penchant for glam rock, because that's what was happening in the early 70s. And then later on Zeppelin and the Stones and all those sorts of more mature bands. So I taught myself from the age of maybe 11 onwards, and that's what I've done ever since, until I was playing in bands and getting paid for it at 12, I think.
Wow.
With a band called the Chubbies, and and then I at the age of 18 I moved into the city, got a job at Brash's and Allen's. Hello, girls. And
were you working at Brash's when Tommy Emmanuel was teaching there? Was it Brash's?
Quite possibly.
Okay. I hear stories about, I think it was Brash's. Maybe someone can write that in, but
Brash's, it was in Elizabeth Street, and then Allen's was around the corner in Collins Street. And I used to just go to the clubs to seek out a guitar gig, because I wanted to be in a band. That's all I wanted to do, was get up and just rock. And it wasn't with any sort of hormone infused agenda in mind. It wasn't all about the girls, although they did come, and so to speak. And I just wanted to rock. Yeah. So I remember going to Bongo Starkey's Jump Club in Collingwood,
right,
in Smith Street in the very early 80s, and I saw a little band called The Adventure, and I thought they were a great band. It was kind of at the new wave stage of things. Spandau Ballet and ABC and all those sorts of bands were kind of hip and groovy, and Duran Duran and all that sort of stuff. And that's what they were doing as well, Simple Mindsy kind of stuff. And I thought, all you guys need is a really good guitar player. So I forced myself upon them and talked them into letting me at least have a rehearsal with them. And I know that they weren't sure about it, but in the end, I did join the band, and I made it a lot tougher, I think. And we ended up being one of the first bands on Countdown.
Oh, right.
Unsigned bands on Countdown.
That's cool.
the band broke up not long after that, unfortunately, and I went back to work at Brashes and Allens for a couple of years to, just to stay as in part of the industry. And I can't remember when it was, maybe 86, the Uncanny X-Men needed a session player because their guitar player, Ron Thiessen, who's since rejoined the band, couldn't do the tour. So Kevin Beamish was out. He'd just finished the REO Speedwagon album, and he was producing their album called What You Give Is What You Get. And I did the sessions for that with Chuck Hargraves, who went to join Daryl's band. And so I was an Uncanny X-Men for the best part of a year. And then I met, which nearly killed me because those guys partied unbelievably hard, which was kind of fun, but dangerous as well. And
that was their big album, I think, wasn't it?
The big album was the one previous to it called 'Cause Life Hurts.
Okay.
And the one that I played on was unfortunately pretty much the swan song for that era of the band, although they're still touring now. But I'd met James Reyne at Inflation nightclub through a mutual friend at about 4 a.m. right into the X-Men tour, and he'd just come back from California, I think, and Australian Crawl had broken up the year previously. He'd bashed out an album in LA, his first solo album.
Was that the one with Hammerhead?
With Hammerhead and Rip It Up and Fall of Rome, and probably 2 or 3 other top 10 singles on it as well, with a friend called Jeff Scott, who's still a great mate of mine, and Jeff was in the band. Anyway, James, we had a mutual friend. We were all polishing off a lot of bourbon at 3 or 4 in the morning at Inflation at the bar, and he asked, and his friend said, Brett plays great guitar. James said, yeah, I've heard. Do you want to come and join my solo band? So I had to make a very tough decision, because I was in the middle of a tour with the X-Men, about do I continue with the X-Men, who I felt were kind of going to implode, or do I pick up the pieces and carry on with James Reyne's new band? And I made the decision to join James's band, and the next 2 weeks were spent at Factory Sound, just around the corner from here, auditioning bass players. Right. And
they used to have rooms there, practice rooms. I think.
They did, yep, and that's where we all used to practice, and it was great fun. And so I've been on and off with James ever since.
Wow, that's okay. I didn't realise it was that long. That's amazing.
Yep, 87, I think.
Wow, and so there's lots of other names there that you've played with. How did that happen if you're with James?
Well, because you're mixing in those circles, and you have whatever degree of respect I had at that point, then you're noticed by other people that mix in those circles, the Ross Wilsons and the Daryl Braithwaites, and it was mainly James' band who worked on those first couple of Daryl Braithwaite albums.
Right.
We all did the sessions. I did some on the first one as well, and so it was a bit of a fraternity, I guess you could say, of those higher rating or higher selling artists, or they were at that point in time. And it was just guilt by association, really.
Okay.
So I just got to know them all, and as soon as a vacancy came up and you're in that fraternity, and there's probably still half a dozen of us maybe now, you'll get the call. If somebody can't, if Ross hasn't got a guitar player for a tour or a couple of shows, I'll get a call. Or if Daryl's fella Jeff Wells, who plays with him now, you probably know Jeff, fabulous guy, amazing guitar player. If he can't do it because he's sick or something, Brett, can you come to Darwin tomorrow, please? And it's been like that ever since. So I'm pretty fortunate.
Seems to be a small handful of mostly guys, I think, really, but that keep getting these gigs. And
and I think that's largely because of not what you can do, but because they like you, really.
Yeah.
On any tour, if you've got a member of the band who's a bit annoying, it's a serious thorn in the side, and they're unfortunately shown the door fairly quickly.
Yes.
Because you've got to live with people, and really that's the first criteria for hiring any new band member on a lengthy tour, is you have to be able to like them and live with them, because you spend so much time together.
Now, when I knew you were coming in here, and we tried to get you in here for a while, I said, hey, come on the show and show me how to play Beautiful People or Errol, and you said, Colonel, I will kill you if... No, you didn't say that. But
well, I can do it, but you see, I'm only covering it as well because it was Simon Binks who played all of that stuff, and Simon's an amazing guitar player, very inventive, full of soul, lovely tones, and so to a large extent, I'm just playing in my own way what he documented on those early Australian Crawl albums. Until we get to the solo stuff where I've recorded quite a lot of it.
And so to do those iconic songs, and they are iconic, I mean, they're famous Australian songs, that is that something that you spoke about with James, or James just said, hey, do what you want, give me something different?
Well, the freedom to move was always there, and James was very liberal in that regard, but there's always going to be signature licks, like the nylon string solo in Reckless, the riff that you were talking about at the front of Beautiful People, the riff in Errol. They've got to be played right because understandably that's what the audience want to hear. They're there to see a live representation of the records they love.
Yes. So
you have to pay homage to the nostalgia element and do the right thing, and I try to do that as closely as I can. Yeah.
Let's talk guitars. What I'm guessing you have a fairly large collection.
Yeah.
Maybe
a little too large, probably.
When you first started, what did you start on? When you're out gigging?
The first, when I was out gigging, it was one of those crazy looking Yamaha late 60s Space Cadet kind of.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Do you know the ones that I'm talking about? Yeah. It's got a hockey stick headstock and a very Jetsons kind of body shape.
Yes.
That would have been the first proper guitar back in 73, 74. And I remember, because I'm always tinkering with stuff, I can't help myself, I pulled it to bits and it ended up in a laundry basket somewhere and stayed there for probably the best part of 15 years. Because I bought myself a new Fernandez something or other.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then Fender Squire, I had a black Fender Squire for a long time, and when I started working at Brash's I was able to afford a Gibson Les Paul XR1, I think it was, which was a
like early 80s model.
Yeah, it was part of that Baldwin kind of era in Gibson, which I ended up selling to pay for the front fence of the house that we bought in Mount Eliza. But because you start to accrue guitars, you would know this more than anybody, that they become currency. So you start to trade them, swap them, sell them, keep buying things, because you're always on the tone chasing, trail.
Yes.
And I think most guitar players are like that, which is why the industry is always so healthy. Regardless of the current economic climate around us, guitar players just can't help themselves. They want more pedals, they want to try this guitar, they want that guitar, or they want to try that amp, et cetera, et cetera. So I've probably got 40 or 50 guitars now, although I'm trying to sell quite a few of them. And
if the weather's sunny, you feel like playing guitar. If it's miserable, I think I better play some guitar.
Well, I always feel like playing guitar.
That's good.
And I still practice for maybe 2 or 3 hours every single day.
Wow, okay. I was going to ask you that. So.
And the YouTube thing has allowed me to explore that creativity even more, and allowed me to kind of use it as a conveyance system for my own musical ideas.
Yes. Because
most of the YouTube stuff that I do is improvised.
Yes.
And so in that way, I guess I'm using an alternative conveyance or platform rather than just writing straight up songs and recording them and releasing them that way, which I've rarely done.
Well, I'll ask you about YouTube in a minute, but when you practice, are you rehearsing through songs that you have to learn over and over again for a new act, or are you just...
Well, I do that because you've got to do that. If Daryl says I'm going out and we've got 5 new songs, or Ross says I want to do some of the old Daddy Cool stuff and I haven't heard it, I've got to put in a couple of days to make sure that I'm doing it justice, which is what they naturally and understandably expect. So yes, I'll do that. But if I'm practicing alone and without an agenda, I always look for something that's going to challenge me, and that can be jazz or sweep picking or some crazy technique that I've seen Holsworth do. Anything that I've not been able to previously do, I'll have a crack at. Just something to make me further my experience, further my horizons. an old friend used to say, "Die falling forwards," and I've
That's true.
And I've always tried to live by that motto. You've got to keep going forwards and upwards.
Oh, I say that to students we have here as well. It's like don't practice the same thing over and over again.
No.
Do it for a couple of days and then try something new.
Yeah.
And then come back. And,
that's good, and it stimulates your mind and your creativity. It makes you think about different things. And then funnily enough, I'll usually take the dog for a walk maybe once or twice a day. And so while I'm doing that, walking is very good for thinking and considering.
Yes.
And then I'll come back and I've hatched a new crazy harebrained idea in my head, and I'll sit down with the Fractal and whichever guitar I decide to use and try and do something about it.
Do you see young Jimmy Hocking on your walk? Doesn't he live down there?
Jimmy and I are old mates because we used to skateboard together.
Oh, right. Oh, I've seen, he's been posting some old skateboard
pics. And Jimmy is still a great skateboarder and an amazing guitar player and an amazing human being, and we've known each other since, the late 70s, when we first were listening to Devo and the Sex Pistols and skating at the Noble Park Bloodbath, g'day Jim, together with the Radland team, who are still skating, and I'm still friends with quite a few of those guys.
Wow.
I'm not allowed to skate anymore because if I break something,
yeah,
and we're in the middle of a tour, I'm stuffed.
In trouble.
Jim doesn't care; he just does it anyway. So all the best to him. But I still have skateboard dreams.
Oh. Do you still own one?
3.
Do you do any skating
and
at all?
all the gear? Yeah, I'll go for a very gentle roll up at the Metalizer skate park every now and again because you just can't stop it once it's in your blood.
Does your daughter skate?
Sadie doesn't skate. No. She gave it a go for a little bit, but no, it didn't catch on, unfortunately. Despite spending several $100s on gear for her as well, she never used it.
So your daughter,
yes,
helped you get into YouTube. I think I read that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. In 2008, when YouTube was a fledgling and my little YouTube career was also very fledgling, I used to use a MacBook Pro, not unlike the one you're filming with, and just set it up on the desk, use its mic and its little camera that's built into the screen, and make very early Subdecay and Catlin bred fuzzbox videos. There are a couple of Portland brands that are still in existence to this day and still doing well. And Sadie and I were always extremely close. Wherever Dad went, Sadie was, and she was only 6 or 7 at the time, and quite a gorgeous little thing, although I'm biased, I would say that, and very vibrant and vivacious on the camera. So she appeared in a lot of those early videos just for fun, and that opened up the demographic completely, because it wasn't just fuzzbox nerds watching my videos anymore. It was the wives and girlfriends as well, because little Sadie was on, you see. So that gave
brilliant marketing strategy.
Well, and it was unintentional, but it worked. I kid you not. And it was at about that time that Aaron Miller from Pro Guitar Shop in Portland, who Pro Guitar Shop had the big online store and the big YouTube channel as well, with Andy, who's still running now with Reverb. Aaron put an ad in. He wanted online teachers, and I said, Aaron, I'll give it a shot, just in a quick email, thinking I'll probably never hear from them again because they're so huge, and there's probably 6,000 other guys that are doing the same. But I got a phone call 10 minutes later, and by the end of that day, I'd become part of the Pro Guitar Shop team, which was like, whoa. And now, so suddenly I had to deliver in a far more professional way. So my skills took a very big upward turn in a fairly short amount of time, and that put me on the global stage. So I'm forever indebted to Aaron, who sadly has passed away since. But I've remained electronic buddies with Andy and all the guys that were involved with it.
We get so many people in here that know you, but they know you from YouTube. Yeah, and the gear demos. So,
yeah, well,
and then you sort of say,
I've been stopped
James Reyne's
at passport queues in Germany and Vietnam from people who know me on YouTube, but not from my work with James Reyne, because with all due respect to James, he's not very well known outside of Australia. But YouTube is global, and most of my audience is either American, Russian, Japanese. Australia is way down on the viewer list.
Yeah.
So it's an odd feeling to be called out by a German in a Vietnamese passport queue. You're Brett Kingman, the famous guitar player from YouTube. Can I have your autograph? And I'm looking at I don't take all that fame thing very well, which is kind of contrary to making so many videos, I suppose. But oh man, I just blush and, you know, turn red and carry
Do you look
on.
at the stats? You're someone that looks at all the... Do you monitor your stats, which country?
I do, but
watches?
I'm not consciously trying to improve them, and I don't have a subscriber link on any of my videos. I really don't care about any of that sort of stuff. I'm just happy that I have a fairly loyal following, and my subs are maybe 50k or whatever you said it was before, 51 or something.
That's good.
Which is kind of modest in comparison to some of the huge guys that have come up since. But
in Australia, that's a lot.
Apparently, I sell a lot of stuff because I tell it how it is. It's not about me; it's about the product. So when I'm editing, I try to edit with the viewer in mind. So I look at it from a third person's perspective or objective. And if I get bored watching me, they're certainly going to be bored watching me. So I'll slice it out.
Do you have a time limit that you try and stick to?
Well, if you look at the YouTube stats, and here's an interesting one. Apparently, the attention span is about 14 seconds before people will click over to something else. So
that makes sense.
If you've gotten this far into the interview, I salute you, because that's pretty amazing. But so I try to wrap it up in 5 minutes if it's just a 3-knob pedal. But if we're talking, and increasingly so, if we're talking about more digital stuff, you know, like a Fractal or any number of new brands, especially the new Chinese brands and Japanese brands that are coming out with all this high-tech gizmo, you know, they've got suddenly 50 different parameters that have to be kind of condensed into a short amount of time rather than just one trick. So it's making my job a little more challenging and to some extent difficult. But yeah, it's got to be under 10 minutes.
What's your equipment?
A couple of very basic Canon cameras, the 60Ds, 1755 lenses, an iPhone X, a souped up iMac, Final Cut Pro, and Logic.
Okay. And you have another channel as well.
I have
plug.
Oh, my wife has a gardening channel. My gorgeous wife Elizabeth she's an unbelievably talented gardener, home gardener, I guess, and everything she does is very pretty, and she likes to make things with flowers and wreaths and decorative stuff for the home. And because she presents so well, far better than I do on camera and in talking, we decided that we'll create a channel for her. So her channel's called Garden Girl, and you'll find her predominantly on Facebook and Instagram, and it's only a couple of years old, but she's doing well.
That's cool.
And that's something that we can do together, which is another good thing.
Yeah.
And it gets me out of the bloody studio and into the garden, into the fresh air, which is doubly as good a thing.
Yes.
So it's all good. There's no negatives associated with that. And I'm happy to be able to, you know, use the skills that I've developed with my own channel for something that's good for her.
I'll tag all this in the video.
Oh, thank you. That's very
kind.
kind.
Go through. If you had a top 5 list of all the things that, and it's probably hard to remember them all, but of all the things you've demoed, and you had to take a couple with you, what would it be?
Well, the Axe-Fx has been the greatest revelation to me since actually learning to play the guitar. So in the studio, it's my greatest asset. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I would grab the Axe-Fx 3 before anything else. Secondly, I would grab one of my Ernie Ball guitars. I've got maybe a dozen of those, and I'm very fortunate to be looked after well by Ernie Ball in California.
Do you get the signature models, or?
I have a couple of Petrucci's signature models. I've got a couple of Albert Lees. Lately, I've been using their Cutlass, which is a kind of a take on the Strat, but it has modern refinements, not unlike your beautiful Guthrie Govan Charvel.
Yes.
And they're solid and they sound amazing, and they always perform great on stage. So they're my first call as far as guitars go, and I could pick any one of those really. But if I had to pick one, it's going to be the HSS Cutlass, because it's so versatile and easy to play. I still have a love for the old fuzz pedals, so I'd probably grab a Sean Klinger Mark 1 tone bender.
Oh, I haven't tried that one.
Well, the Mark 1 is the first tone bender, and it made a lot of early David Bowie albums under the feet of Mick Ronson.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Okay, so he used to jam one into the old super bass head, I think the Marshall, whichever the 200 watt Marshall was, and made it.
Is that the sound he's using on Moon Age Daydream?
That's the one.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
I think Jimmy Page probably used a Mark 1 early in his career as well. Great sounding fuzz.
Okay.
Very difficult to build because you have to balance all of the transistors, and there's not too many of them, but they have to be, we're talking about glass transistors, old germanium stuff, and that temperature and gains and all that sort of stuff. They're a pain in the ass apparently to build. So if you can get a good one, and Sean Klinger makes the best, I think. So I've got several of his. G'day, Sean. Of his Mark 1s, and he's another amazing guitar player. Sadly,
where's he based?
Sadly under the radar for most. He's out in kind of between Cranbourne and Berwick, out that way.
Okay, wow.
Southeastern suburbs.
Some amazing local guys.
Yes, there's a lot of under the radar amazing local guys. His partner Darren is also an amazing pedal builder, Dazatronics. So what have we got? We've got the Axe effects as far as modern accoutrements go, and we've got a great guitar, and I've got my old
Ernie balls.
I've got the Ernie balls. I've got a Mark 1 fuzz from Sean. I really wouldn't want too much because the Axe effects gives me several hundred amps and cabinets and every effect known to mankind, but it can't do fuzz as well.
If something, if you had to switch back to a valve amp, what would you do? Would you take a little combo out on tour at PA Systems good enough for
I
that?
would actually. I'd probably take the fairly recently released Marshall Super Lead Plexi, the little 20 watt version. Have you seen them?
No.
They're called the Studio Series.
I haven't had one.
And it's an absolute. There are demos of it on my channel.
Okay.
Funnily enough, it sounds like the big 100 watt 1959 Super Lead Plexi.
Wow.
Which is just ridiculously loud and almost too loud to wind it into that perfect spot where it starts to break up and you get that brown sound, which is what Van Halen was all about. Yeah. But the 20 watt version is a little more tolerable in terms of its volume, but it's still ridiculously loud. So I'd take it and some sort of cabinet. They make a cabinet to go with it. I haven't tried the combo version of it yet, but that's what I would use because it's a JTM 45 circuit pretty much. It'll clean up very well, but once you crank it, oh man, they just sing. Gorgeous.
Is it made in England?
Yep.
Okay, right. Oh, yep. Nice. I have to try.
Yeah, they're great. You'll never look back. And they've paid very strong homage to the classic old late 60s super leads, which were all different back then because they were kind of the last of the hand wide, so everyone sounded different. But there was, a marginal sound that everybody had in their heads, and that's the sound that they wanted. I guess the greatest example of it is Ed Van Halen's 1968 Super Lead.
Yes.
But of course it's under his hands, and he's got a pretty hot pickup in the back, and et cetera, and
they're funny how many people go for that the classic Marshalls.
Well, even in the Axe effects, I'm using Plexi models.
Oh right.
I'm using on stage with James. I flip and flop between one clean amp and one dirt to filthy amp, and the dirt to filthy amp is a classic 1959 Super Lead Plexi.
Wow.
Through a greenback cabinet, which is what I used to use when I was a kid.
Have you just got did you say you've just got the one fold back on stage that you can hear yourself?
No, I run in stereo, and normally because we're lucky enough to play pretty big stages, there's a Nexo rig on that's provided for the front line monitoring. So I'll have two of those in stereo facing right back up at me behind the microphone. Okay. With a perfectly flat EQ, because as soon as you start EQing for vocals or the room or whatever, it's screwing with your guitar tone.
Yes.
So I do all of the EQing with the XFX, and they are supremely loud. A lot of guys use in-ears.
Yeah.
But because I'm an old school player, I still prefer to feel the air move, and a couple of 1,000 watt Nexos.
Loud.
Oh
I had Taylor Swift's guitar player in when they were here, and he's on the XFX.
Yep.
And I said, "Oh, do you have a floor? Are you changing all the sounds with a floor switch?" And he's like, "No. There's a guy under the stage.
I have a man to do that for me.
He does it all for him." So he's got an in-ear, the XFX, and his guitar basically, and but he doesn't change anything there. So he's just got his guitar running around wirelessly.
Well, we're a different type of band, I suppose, and with all due respect to Taylor Swift and a lot of those bands, everything is sequenced and it's in perfect order, and it's unpredictability is not part of their set.
Yes.
So they can MIDI it all up to some sort of sequencer, and that sequencer, because we're talking full-blown MIDI stuff, will do all of the tonal changes
Click,
on the
track,
fly.
and away you go.
Yep.
You guys are not. You don't do that.
Never.
Yeah.
No, we play the songs in pretty much the same arrangement from start to finish, but I like to have full control over what I'm doing, because I might feel like using a Carolan Takana clean amp for once instead of a Bogner Shiva clean amp or something like that. So I have that at my disposal and at my feet.
What acoustic wise? What are you using?
Martin,
Yeah.
OM28,
Yeah.
OM28 Retro E, which is a beautiful guitar. It's a bit of it fights you because it's an older design. I think they were designed back in the 1920s. Gosh, we're nearly up to 100 years, aren't we?
Yes.
Next year. And it has very small frets, but it sounds beautiful and it has huge projection, and it looks great, and they just feel glorious. You would know because you've got one. You had one hanging up there somewhere.
Yes.
So I have a Martin OM28E Retro, and I have an old Fender acoustic Telecaster that they built in 1991 in Japan that looks like a kind of twisted Telecaster with a huge slab of spruce on top, and it gets a lot of use as well. I only have 2 acoustic guitars.
Okay. I've tried. So your Martin, is that part of the Heritage series or
Part of the Retro series.
Retro series.
Yeah,
Okay.
which I'm not even sure. I don't know much about acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
I know what I like to hear and what I like to look at and play, of course. And fortunately for my bank balance, that is a fairly slim corridor. So the Martin satisfies everything. But I've had Takaminis in the past, which have been great, but they had so much work when I was doing acoustic shows with James. Eventually they just fall apart. I had a mate in 808 for a long time, 808 BG, the one that Tommy still plays to this day. It was good as well, but I found that in the heat up north in Queensland and stuff, bit of that going on, so I let it go to a lovely girl in Sydney, and I had an Ovation El Dimiola for a long time. It was fun as well, but it became a bit clunky in the end too.
Is that what he's using on Friday night in San Francisco or something? Was he using
quite possibly. What a great album that is.
Yeah, that's a killer.
Oh my lord,
amazing.
Man, did you ever see John Mclaughlin play?
I have. So I absolutely love John Mclaughlin, and I have a lot of the old Mahavishnu records on vinyl and blah blah blah. But he came out a few years ago with Chick Corea, and they played at Hamer Hall, and I went along. I was like second row from the front. This is going to be great. And I don't know what he was using, but he plugged into a little pod, and it didn't sound good. I don't know how it was.
So disappointment reigned.
Big disappointment. Yeah, but this would have been. Man, this was a while ago, at least 10 years ago.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Maybe longer. But,
okay. Well, my experience was different, but it was at Hamer Hall, and there was an Indian percussion player on the floor.
Oh, right. Wow.
And the Spanish guy playing bass, and he just ripped shreds out of that freaking guitar. It was like, whoa.
Oh, mainly acoustic?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the like the Shakti stuff that he was doing.
I guess so. It would have been 10 years ago, I think, maybe more.
Yeah,
but it was pretty mind-blowing, and I can listen to that stuff, but there's no way I'd even attempt it because it's just that's a skill in a different galaxy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. I can't even work out when I watch him on YouTube playing. He kind of when he plays, he's got these 2 fingers sort of stuck together, and it's so quick.
Yeah.
And
it's unbelievably quick.
Yeah.
And accurate.
Yeah, and super accurate. Yeah. It's amazing.
And then you team that up with Al doing all of his.
Yeah.
And then Paco de la Chia doing the flamenco thing.
Yes.
And you got Friday Night at San Francisco.
Yeah.
And it's just like an
out of this world
explosion. It's nuts. Yeah.
Did you
one of my all-time favorite albums. Killer.
It's fantastic. Do yourself a favor.
Oh yes, if you don't own that one, you probably should.
Yeah. Have you checked out? He did a final tour of the US just recently with Jimmy Herring, and doing a lot of the old Mahavishnu stuff. Did you see any of that on YouTube?
No.
It's pretty cool.
See, all of that music I've really yet to discover. I still haven't listened to it, but I do remember slipping on Friday night in San Francisco. I think Ed Van Halen actually recommended it back in the early 80s when it first came out. And because he said it, I better go and have a listen. And I wasn't disappointed. And that probably put me onto Holdsworth as well, because Eddie Van Halen was a great champion for the late great Alan Holdsworth too.
Did you go see Holdsworth when he was in
the only time I ever saw Holdsworth was at the bar at NAMM in California a few times, having a beer with him.
Yes.
But I never saw him play live. I think I did see him do one clinic in LA during 2008, 2009 NAMM. Yeah, great beer drinker. Loved his beer. Yes. And what a player.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Amazing. Out of this world. His the original bass player from his very first album lives in Melbourne.
Really?
Yeah, Mick Scully. Hello, if you're watching there.
G'day, Mick.
I think he's out at Eltham somewhere or something like that. So,
wow.
Yeah, I saw Holdsworth in the mid '90s when he came out. Had Chad Wackerman on drums and it's mind blowing for about the first half an hour, and then it kind of just was very same. But I mean, incredible player. Out of this world.
Yeah, nuts. That modal stuff that he does, it's crazy. I'm still trying to get my head around even just attempting it.
Yes. You just finished your tour, Brett.
We just finished a very short tour, yes. Unfortunately, half the band got pretty crook, especially our fearless leader, James. G'day, James. So we ended up having to cancel the second of 2 shows at the Gov in Adelaide, but we'll be back there on December the 27th. But generally speaking, the tour was a tremendous success, and we played everywhere from Sydney through to Cairns, and then across to Adelaide. There's a couple of months off now. We'll be doing the One Electric Day shows with Farnham. I think they've been announced, so I don't think I'm out of place telling you about them. And then the Red Hot Summer Tour has just been announced. You might have seen the lineup for that. It's unbelievable. So that'll be proving to be good fun for the best part of 4 months, beginning in early January next year.
There's some incredible festivals and tours.
Red Hot and One Electric Day are largely the brainchild of another mate of mine called Dwayne McDonald. G'day, Dwayne. And he's done incredibly well putting these festivals together, and they largely cater for kind of mid to late period heritage rock acts. So the Big Day Out and the Falls and all of those things cater for more of the younger and indie bands. But the Red Hot caters for, I guess, the 30-somethings upwards, and he packs them out every weekend. We'll play to 10 or 20,000 people for 4 months.
Who's on that bill?
Boom Crash Opera, Killing Heidi, The Living End, The Angels, Baby Animals, James Reyne, and Hunters and Collectors.
Wow. It's
a very big lineup, and I salute anybody that can sit through that much Chardonnay noise for 6 hours in the heat in summer.
Are they still doing it up at the Botanical Gardens there? They were doing so. What was that one called? I think Ross Wilson did it the last one or the one before.
That was a Melbourne Council thing, and I did do quite a few of those. We did do quite a few of those. That was a different organisation. I think that was put on by a joint thing between the Botanical Gardens and the Melbourne Council. What was it? I can't remember what. Twilight Festival or something like that. No, the Red Hot Summer Tour is a privately run thing with Frontier and Dwayne McDonald, and it travels all of the major wineries in Australia, which is also very convenient because I don't mind tasting a little bit of wine every now and again. And the food's usually good too, so it's a lot of fun, and every gig's an event. It's pretty good. That's
cool, man. Well, I highly recommend going to see Brett Kingman, and if you can't see him live, tune into his YouTube channel because it's pretty amazing. Speaking of drinking and wine, no one leaves empty-handed today.
I've got a water here. I'm good.
Proudly present you with
Furphy.
A 6-pack of
that's very
Furphy,
kind. Thank
born
you.
in Geelong.
Thank you so much.
Deep in Melbourne.
Look, Elizabeth, I wasn't going to have a beer tonight, but now I'm afraid I'm going to have one or two of these excellent Furphys. Thank you very much.
Customary handshake. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Anytime. And if you're watching, please subscribe. We need more subscribers. And subscribe to Brett as well. And if you have any questions, you can contact us. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for having me. What good fun.
Oh, cool.
Now to have a beer.
See you, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.